everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Vanissia, this is the Woolly Worker Knitting Podcast, and today I am joining you for just a simple, relaxed knit and chat. I think it might be my fourth or my fifth one on this channel and you guys seem to like them. I have a couple of things that I know I can discuss that I asked on Instagram if there were any topics you'd like me to chat about, but usually these videos are very much less structured, less planned, less edited, and less everything than my usual knitting podcast. But of course, if you're more interested in the typical format of a podcast, you can check out my back catalogue of episodes and just wait for the next one. But if not, and if you'd like to join me for, I guess, about an hour and knit together, then I'd love to have you keep me company, and vice versa. It's always nice because this helps me kind of knit and discuss my thoughts and work some things out loud. So it's really helpful for me to do that right now. And then I know that a lot of you find it useful to listen to when I publish this in the future. So it really is like a mutual exchange. Before we get into it, I guess if you want to find me on social media, you can find me on Ravelry, Instagram. There's a Discord server where we've been having a lot of casual chit chat with each other, and I've been finding that really, really nice. I'm really glad I set it up, and I'm really glad that you guys are participating in it. So if you've been shy or you haven't joined yet, give it a go. No commitment if you just want to lurk, but if you want to just ask a little question, post a little photo, it's encouraged. And then what I am wearing today is my Sila sweater by Jonah Hietala from Lion Magazine. No, actually it's not. That was the Lento. This is not from Lion Magazine. I got my Jonah patterns mixed up, but it was made in St. Nisgarn brushed alpaca in this amazing color. I find it quite soft. It's not my favorite jumper. I've talked about that in a podcast episode where I talk about this jumper, but I really, really like the color, so that's why I'm wearing it today, and it's really cozy, and I'm just like wearing it with some leggings and some DK socks. The project I've got with me, I wanted to film this video a couple of days ago, but I had nothing that was just stockinette on the needles, so I've started an Oslo hat, literally for the sole purpose of making this knit and chat. So we'll see how that goes because it's a navy color. It's really dark navy. I'm using some scraps that has been in stash for a long time now. If you watched my first episode, I think, or even my second, this was yarn I used for my spring vest summer edition. No, that makes no sense. Vest number 2 spring edition by My Favorite Things Knitwear. This is Isier silk mohair in color 100, and this is Isier alpaca 2, which is a fingering weight 50/50 alpaca wool in the color Midnight, and it is really beautiful. It has some light marling of navy, electric blue and purple in it, so it's a really deep color. I'll show this on camera even though this is not the point of this video, but I'm really in love with this combo that I use for my vest. It's a gorgeous combination and gorgeous fabric, and I had leftovers that were just enough for an accessory, so hence me picking out the Oslo hat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to if it was spinning, I would say like pre-draft. I'm going to like unwind the mohair and unwind this a little bit so that I don't have to constantly be pulling and tugging on it. The usual thing I try to do in these types of videos is indeed to keep it less edited and more natural, and I've gotten good feedback on that, so thank you very much for always kind of confirming that it doesn't bother you and it's not annoying. When I'm editing this, it's obviously much easier because I just basically upload the video in my editing software, add the intro and outro, and just run, like I listen to the whole thing. But there's only minimal cuts to do, there's no photos or anything to put on the screen, and unless there's like a major interruption or a huge gap or usually sneezes and blowing my nose and stuff, I cut that out for sure. But then I kind of leave even hesitations because it is natural to hesitate and not know what you're wanting to say for maybe 5-10 seconds, so I could leave that in. But as always, if there's any sort of feedback you want to give or thoughts you have on the video production or quality or tips, you're the viewer, so it's your experience, so I am open to feedback, although obviously keep in mind I'm just a person, there's only one of me doing this, and also it's not like I have a limited budget for production value of things, so if you have tips and tricks and things that you know would make the quality of this channel better, I'm always happy to hear it. But if it's things like, oh, your flat doesn't look good, or you should change your voice, like I can't do that. So yeah, that was not at all what I was intending to talk about. But I really like talking about the podcast and making it. And I feel like there's not that some podcasters talk about it, and I love hearing their experiences of podcasting, because then as a podcaster I'm like, oh okay, I do that too, or like, oh I don't do that. But I think I want to make content about making content. If anybody's interested in that, I definitely am planning to make a big sort of behind the scenes of filming a podcast episode. And then I was thinking of making a video that would be about tips if you're intending to start your own knitting podcast. Because I know a lot of you have messaged me saying that you just started a knitting podcast, or like we're almost going to, and that has made me very happy. And a few people have actually tagged me in their YouTube videos, which definitely helps me notice that. So if you're making a video and you know, you mention me because I inspired you or something, which like that has happened, if you tag me in the description of the YouTube video, then I get a notification, so then I can go check out your video. But obviously what you can also do is just message me on Instagram or something and say, oh hey, I've started the channel if you want to have a look. Because I do have space on my YouTube queue for things to watch, and I'm always happy to discover new people. So yeah, if you want to self-promote yourself, I'm happy to discover new smaller channels, or new medium-sized channels, or large channels. I'm happy to discover anyone. So anyway, so today, like I said, there were a couple of things people have asked on Instagram, and I will not talk about all of them because there will be no time, and I guess I'll see how long it takes me to answer one, and if I am in the mood to speak eloquently, which, you know, when you speak about speaking, it makes you double think how you're speaking. But anyway, the first question I kind of want to talk about is how to take photos for Instagram. I was quite chuffed that somebody asked me that. It obviously means that they think I'm doing something right. So thank you for asking that question. For the big majority of my Instagram account, I was only posting flat lays, sometimes photos outdoors, sometimes hung on a coat hanger outdoors, because I don't really have a coat hanger spot indoors that is nice. Our flat really doesn't have much indoor lighting that is good, or big windows, or flat spots near windows. So it's really, really hard to find natural lighting in the flat, and it has been limiting for me to then take whip photos or aesthetic photos or anything. So what I really usually do is I stand at the window in our living room, put the item on the floor. Either I lay it as flat as possible, or I kind of like throw the jumper on, and I try and get everything in frame and take a photo of that. My photos are very utilitarian / functional and not artsy. If I was a pattern designer, for example, people would say of my photos that they show the item very well, as opposed to maybe pattern designers who show little glimpses of a shoulder or a very close-up of the hem, and you're like, can you show a photo of the finished garment? Like, what does this look like? Especially if it's something like a shawl, for example, and they're always wearing it around their neck, but there isn't a photo of the shape of the shawl, and it's like, what does this look like when it's not on you? Anyway, so I do a lot of functional type photos, because I feel like that's kind of what I want to showcase in my Instagram. Like, my sort of values or ethos behind my Instagram is I want to show my knitting. So why would I hide it behind 20 filters, 20 fake staging or posing and moody lightings and stuff? And no shade at all to anybody who does that, but my Instagram, and also for practical reasons, because I'm less good anyway at having a visual eye and aesthetic for that kind of stuff. Like, I just think it's easier to take photos of your flat lays as opposed to like making up those fake setups with props and accessories and everything. They're really nice to look at, I just don't do them. So my advice is natural lighting. That's kind of it. Like, that's really all I do. sometimes there's a nice lighting in the bedroom that we sleep in, like golden hour type lighting, and so I've taken a few really nice photos there, but that is so dependent on the the day, the time of the day, and the seasons, so I wouldn't rely on that. Oh, sorry, I'm just getting a bit warm. I'm sitting on my electric heated blanket. If you notice it in videos, it's really hard to leave my chair when I'm on here. I'm like a cat on a nice radiator. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Process for choosing yarns for a project. I quite like that question, even though I, again, don't think I'll have that much of an interesting answer to it. What I used to do at the very beginning was that I would almost inevitably choose the exact same yarn as a designer. Well, actually, that's not true. The very, very beginning of my knitting, when I didn't know about, I guess, Ravelry and Instagram as much, is I would find a pattern somewhere, like on YouTube or Pinterest, and then I would just use whatever, like literally just like whatever was cheapest on Lovecraft or something. So like, that was true for crochet especially. So that was not necessarily a good experience. But when I got into, you know, petite knit and everything, and like the Instagram scene and the knitting community, then I was really sucked into just buying what was suggested by the pattern designer, and usually in the same colors. And the reasons for that, well, first of all, it was doable for me to do because I had the disposable like budget for that. I didn't spend much money on other things, so it didn't bother me to spend money on merino and mohair, especially because I was getting so much joy from it. Like, it didn't feel like an extravagant purchase because it was bringing a lot of entertainment and then also a wearable piece at the end. So it was doable for me money-wise. It was also available to me like physically because a lot of UK shops were selling those Sandnes Garn, Isayer, etc. And I had such a lack of knowledge about substitutions that I just couldn't imagine what better job I would do coming up with ideas myself, and I didn't have some kind of like stash to fall back on where I would look at my stash and think, oh, what do I have that would work for that? I just didn't have a stash. So now I do have a big stash, and I really like the fact that if there's a new pattern coming out, like for example now the Isayer Archives collection is coming out, and there's a lot of new patterns that were very trendy on Instagram coming out, and it's like, oh, maybe I have something in stash right now that would work for that. So if I hopped on that trend, I wouldn't even need to purchase or use exactly what was recommended in the pattern. So I like having a stash for that reason. In terms of how to choose substitutions, I focus on the fiber content, you know, so if you're substituting 100% non-superwash merino for another, like for example knitting for Olive merino and Sandnes Garn Sunday, that's quite like you wouldn't even think twice about making that substitution. I use the website YarnSub for really good in-depth analysis of yarn properties as well as their suggestions for substitutions. They have a really good sort of percentage matching system where if you type in, you know, Sandnes Garn Sunday, it'll tell you what else you can use to get a similar result and what you'd be sacrificing in favor of something else. And it also tells you a price comparison. So I like that website. I've been talking about how I've been trying to lean more into like colors that I really like or that will suit me, as opposed to just doing beige or whatever the model is wearing, because, you know, someone that looks really, really amazing in orange, it just isn't the case for me. So even if they take the best photography that makes them look radiant, I will not look radiant in that exact same jumper. It's a like false impression. So I try to look back on knits that I wear, like either in old videos or photos. For example, I know that when I'm going to be editing this, I'm going to be thinking, oh wow, that's a good color on you. So I know that this color will be revisited in the future. And if I have some beige stash, I'm just kind of like keeping it maybe as an accent color or just like on my Ravelry D-stash if someone ever wants to get it off my hands. I'm not too worried about it because tastes might change again and I might want to get back into beige and orange or something, but I also have been trying to focus more on soft yarns like merino, and that's pretty much it. Silk, I do like pure silk from Knitting for Olive. I think I'm going to be focusing on that this summer. I didn't love Drop's Bell and how that felt. So I think that answers the question of how I choose yarns and what I gravitate towards. I can't really think of anything else to add that would be insightful. I try and talk about my process when I make podcast episodes and I talk about why I got certain yarns. I think I could probably be more detailed on that though, so I'll try and keep in mind in the future when I film if there was a particular reason for getting that yarn apart from just I really wanted to. Of course I still get very influenced and sometimes make a bit of impulse buying or impulse decisions in terms of, ooh, somebody made this project, it looks amazing, I want the exact same, I'll get what they got. I do that. And I do like it. Sometimes I get a lot of satisfaction if, for example, someone is sharing a project and they have like 3 different yarns used, and it's quite hard to find a website that sells all 3, or the color's out of stock, so I make a note for it later, or I get half of the yarn then, and then wait to be able to get the other half, and then it feels very satisfying to then get the full bundle complete after a while. I find like that's kind of the collecting aspect of this hobby, and it feels like a bit of an achievement to maybe like wait for good deals, and sometimes you have to wait for the right opportunity to come along and then you feel like you did well. So I do like doing that. I do get a lot of enjoyment from completing a stash that's been waiting before a project has to be done. Like for example, I'm planning to make the Birkin by Caitlin Hunter from Lane magazine, that one was, and it's a colourwork project, and I think there's 1 main colour and 4 contrast colours, and I saw a project on Ravelry that I really liked, and I wanted to copy their colours, but the yarn isn't accessible to me. It was a Brooklyn Tweed Loft, so I did some substitutions, and I've had that project in my queue for the longest time, like over a year, and then over the course of the last 12 months I've slowly accumulated the contrast colors, and then I've recently just purchased the main color for that. So it's all coming together, I think, is what, like, the expression I'm trying to put across. Is like, I like it when things all come together. So yeah. Next one will be 9 to 5 work-life balance with knitting. I think I'll put timestamps in this video as well for easier, for ease of, I don't know, if you're wanting to like take a break while you're watching, or if later you remember that I talk about something and you want to come back to the video. I don't know, I like timestamps. I really like timestamps, so I'll always have them in my videos. So anyway, the question, 95 balance with knitting. I think it's definitely a question that people ask a lot, is how do you knit so fast, or people just saying that they wish that they had more time to knit. And I think it's important that we don't compare ourselves too much with each other, especially across countries and everything, and that also applies to the cost of knitting and the cost of yarn. It is impossible to compare. We all have different lives, different currencies, economies, taxes. It's just, there's so much going on, and all we're getting is a tiny little bit snapshot on the internet of someone else's life. So for context, I work full-time 9 till 5, although my work offers flexible working. So what I usually do, since I'm a morning owl, is I wake up and I basically log in remotely. I work from home early, and then I finish work early. So in the morning I log on, do my work. I usually knit at my lunch break, And then after work is finished at maybe 3:30 or 4 p.m., I log off and I'm basically already at my desk and I can already knit. So I like to unwind from work. I put a show on or a podcast and I maybe knit for a couple of hours. Then it's 5 p.m. and I still have the entire afternoon ahead of me. And my partner Ross works shift, so sometimes he's away for 12 hours during the day, sometimes he's away for 12 hours during the night, and then other times he's completely off. So when he's off, we like to spend time together. Obviously, if we're watching TV, I'll be knitting along. If he's cooking in the kitchen, I'll be knitting. That's pretty much the only times that I knit when we're together. It's been cold and boring over here, so we're not doing much at the weekends, even though, again, weekend doesn't really mean anything for him when he's working shifts. So sometimes at the weekend he's working and I'm not, so then I just knit all day because I don't feel like I'm missing out on life or anything because there's nothing else to do. Am I oversharing? Is that really the question? I feel like I used to have a lot of hobbies that I would cycle through. So I don't even know if I'm a creative person, but I've always been quite crafty, and I've really liked hobbies that make you use your hands and are aesthetic and beautiful and that get you a final product at the end. And I've quite liked the aspect of, like showing off something at the end, like ta-da! I like that aspect of a hobby. And I'm also a competitive person. That's something that sometimes makes me choose a hobby over another one. I can be quite anxious. I've talked about that before, and I found knitting to be very meditative. And that was a question that was also asked, was how, what got me into knitting and the benefits of knitting and why I do it. So I guess I'll talk about all of these at the same time. But yeah, I got into knitting because I was crocheting first, and then I kind of got bored of that and wanted to make wearables as opposed to just little amigurumi stuffies. And I tried to make one crochet cardigan, but it was awful. It had no drape. It was way too chunky. I think it was made in aran single crochet. So that was dense and in acrylic, and I'd never wore it, and it didn't fit or anything. It had no shaping. So I got into knitting because I was curious about the ability to make clothes, and I thought it would just be like the same yarns as crochet, but then it opened the door to like luxurious yarns, which can't close that door now. But what I get from it is definitely relaxation. It scratches that creative itch, quiets down my mind, and gives me an opportunity to feel accomplished and achieved. Like, I really like that sometimes there's problem solving to do, even though sometimes the problems are so low stakes and you make up your own problems. Like the number of times that I've gone to Ross, my partner, and been like, okay, so there's this pre-order that happens next week, but then there's also a sale going on there, then a new pattern has come out, but the yarn I want, the color is out of stock, and also I already bought one skein of that color the day before. So I lay out this entire like web of, here are the circumstances and here's the outcome that I want. How do I get the outcome that I want? Spending the least amount of money, using up most of my stash. Like, there's always little goals that we have, or like just the goal being, I want to make this exact replica of this jumper. So yeah, I quite like the fact that sometimes like I set myself little goals like that, and then like I said, like it all comes together and I meet them. Or like a pattern that I've been loving for ages, except one detail has been out for a while, and then someone releases the version that I would like, and I'm like, oh yes, finally, that's really nice. Or also goals such as, right now I have a fair amount of whips lying around the house, and I took the time this morning to sit down and kind of make like the next achievable goals for each of them. So for example, that one will be like, well, you need to unravel your swatch and re-swatch. You need to reach this part of the chart. You need to finish that ball of yarn that is attached to it. So that's been quite nice to break it down into smaller achievable chunks. And then every time that I reach one of those little chunks, I get the nice little dopamine click in the brain that says, yes, you have achieved, you have completed, which we'll crave. So a lot of people, for example, when you think about your life, you can divide it into different sections. You can get a lot of satisfaction from your job, or your family, or your friends, or your children if you have any, or your hobbies, or charity work, volunteering. Like, there's a lot of different areas, and what we want at the end of the day is just to be fulfilled and like happy. Obviously, like, if all of our other primary needs are met, like food, shelter, security, that's pretty much it, right? Like, food and shelter is met, then you're starting to think about the self-actualization of wanting your mind to be well, yeah, like challenged and nurtured. And so anyway, knitting gives me that. I feel very complete, that a lot of the other areas in my life are doing fine, like just well. And then knitting sometimes brings quite a lot of satisfaction and feeling of belonging and of community. It does bring some stressors every now and then, like especially when we think about the emotion of overwhelm and consumerism and things like that. There are things that I think about a lot of the time, is like, do I have too much stuff in my house? Am I going to use all of it? When I knit, am I just moving stash from the shelf to the wardrobe? Sometimes I worry, if we had to move, how much physical space would all of this take in boxes? But for the most part, it's really positive emotions. And so that's what knitting brings me. And I didn't really realize it was going to have that big of an impact on me when I gravitated towards it. Like I said, I used to cycle through a lot of hobbies. I was doing a lot of crochet before knitting, and before crochet I was doing a lot of drawing with colored pencils. And I really, really liked both of these hobbies, and both of them I did for like I would say 1 to 2 years. And now with knitting, we're reaching the end of my second or third year, let's say. Let's be vague, because I don't have the dates in mind. So technically, like, the cycle of hobbies now should be a natural point where I stop knitting and start doing something else. But it really doesn't feel that way at all. Like, I feel like I've not peaked even. Whatever that means. And the fact that I started a YouTube channel about this and not about the other hobbies can be quite telling too. I really think knitting is here to stay in my life. I don't see myself just not. But then that's what worries me sometimes, is like, well, what am I going to do if I don't stop knitting for the next 60 years? Like, where am I going to put all of it? And I guess this is where it comes into gift knitting and giving to charity and what else? Like, I mean, yeah, what am I going to do if I keep knitting for 60 years? Where are my sweaters going to go? I really don't know. So I guess I try not to think about it too much, but if you have an idea, or if you yourself have been knitting for 40 years, and even if you are making, like 2 sweaters a year, and I make more than that, even with 2 sweaters a year, that's a lot of product and output. So where does it go? But yeah, I don't really have a conclusion. This is obviously unscripted. There's no head or tail to this, but I think we all have different reasons why we like knitting and why we got into it. I'd like to know what your likes and dislikes about knitting are. Maybe you could tell me like 1 like and 1 dislike, if there are any. I obviously don't want to bring a whole negative cloud. If knitting only brings positives to you, like, that's fine. That's great, obviously. But if there are any sort of like downsides of knitting, I'd love to know, because like, I am very aware of my one little downside of knitting, which is like the worry about too much and overwhelm. So I'm wondering if this is something that is shared by other people, or if there's other things that bring you some kind of like stop to the, or some kind of balance in the equation, I guess. I don't know. I really didn't mean to go there, but oh well, that's fine. I guess we can go in the next question, which was knitting for others versus knitting for you. This is not really a question, is it? I just summarized it. But I guess I have mostly knitted for myself. In fact, if I go on Ravelry right now and I click on the tags that I assign to my projects, I can see how many items I've gifted to others. Yeah. Oh. Okay, there's actually quite a lot, so let me just count these. $22. I've gifted 22 knits over the entire course of my knitting journey. Most of these were hats and gloves and accessories, and then there was one sweater for Ross last year. And then a few of the sweaters actually. Oh yeah, actually it'll be more, because I gifted some sweaters to my mum when she came over, so I'll have to update that. But yeah, so 23 or 25 projects out of like the 200 projects I've made. Is it 200? Yeah, pretty much. I got distracted, sorry. So yeah, is that like, yeah, 12% of my knitting I've gifted it, which is a statistic. I have no idea where I fall on the spectrum. Oh, the sun is behind me. It probably will not make its way to me. I think we're safe. But yeah, let me know again where you fall on that spectrum. Would you say that you do more knits for yourself or your family or friends or strangers? Do you keep track of it? I love Ravelry for that reason, because I there was some knits on that I didn't even remember giving away, but Ravelry doesn't lie. So anyway, I feel like if I'm buying that fancy expensive yarn, I want it to be for me. I'm selfish that way. Not just kidding. But I feel like I can justify paying the price for this because I know so much more about those yarns than like a family member or a friend would. So it would make me much more happy to have a knit using this yarn than somebody else like who doesn't know anything about Essayer maybe would, and maybe they would just be as happy with something that was like Drops or Cascade. No shade to those brands, they're great for nice affordable yarns that are still using natural fibers. So that's one reason why, and I feel I prefer buying expensive yarns than I do Drops and Cascade. Like, I guess that's also an honest reason why I derive enjoyment from buying those expensive yarns. Like, I just, same as people buying designer handbags or people spending a bit more money to go to a nice restaurant with a nice dessert. Like, we like to treat ourselves with nice things, and I'm not ashamed to say I like nice things. Ergo, I spend money on nice yarns and it makes me happy, so then I want to use them. So then I guess I have less time for gift knitting, because then I'd have to purchase yarns that don't make me as happy purchasing them, because they'd be a bit more boring, and then I would be knitting the item for the person. I don't know if this is selfish or just facts of life. I do feel like I really, really like making things for people, but I also don't want to be an imposition. And I know that as knitters, we know that a sweater, hand-knitted sweater, is amazing, is a gift, and it is an honor that someone would do something like that for someone. I know that. However, I also know that a lot of the time gifts can be impositions, and you know, my worst nightmare would be that someone is too afraid to tell me that they don't want something from me and they just like accept it out of pity. And I don't want someone to just feel like, oh my god, that's one more thing that I've got in my house now that I can't throw away or give, because if she comes over, we need to show that we're using it, blah blah blah. Like, I gifted some Christmas knitting to Ross's family at Christmas, and I'm kind of worried sometimes, like, what if they don't like it and they feel like they have to keep them to show that they liked it. But it's like an irrational fear, but that's why I'm not going to be making 20 hats for Christmas every single year. I'll try and really keep the gifts focused on, like, the knitted gifts, I'll keep it functional. As in, like, you get one pair of mitts and you get one hat in your lifetime, maybe. Unless they specifically ask for it. If a family member or a friend asked me for a knit, I totally would make it for them, depending on reasonableness. My mom asked for a coat the other day, by the way. It was a while ago, but it blew my mind. I was like, no, I cannot knit you a coat. What do you even mean? And we spent so much time on Instagram. She had 0 keywords to give me. Every photo I was showing her like this, she was like, no, not that. Like, not even close. And I was like, you need to give me a direction. What are you talking about? She could not give me anything else than a knitted coat. I think what she meant was a wool coat, which they're not knitted. So anyway, I was saying to her, like, I can't knit you a coat. Like, that's, sorry, you get a hat. But I would happily make something for someone if they asked. I was asking Ross, you know, if he, like, there was a lot of male sweater patterns that I liked and wanted to knit for him, so we sat down and I was asking him, like, what would you like, what colors would you want, blah blah blah, and he very gently and nicely explained that he didn't feel the need to have 10 hand knitted jumpers because he knew that he then wouldn't wear them, because he really just like cycles through the kind of like little rotation of things that he has. So then when I was, you know, offering him to make him like this one and this one and this one and this one, he was like, I like the energy, I like the enthusiasm, but knit stuff for yourself that you will wear, and I'm happy with just like maybe one more knitted sweater or 2. So I talked him up to 2, so I will knit him 2 more sweaters. Then he doesn't want any anymore. So anyway, long story short for this, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not opposed to gift knitting at all, but I really want it to be worth it. And not in the sense that people usually talk about, where they're like someone being knit worthy and someone not respecting a knit and stuff like that. Like, I feel like my optics are a little bit different, where I just don't want the gift to be an imposition on someone, and I want them to really need it before I make it for them. And I guess that stems from my whole consumerism, anti-consumerism stance on life that I try and act on every day and sometimes miserably fail. And I feel like I would just be doing the world a disservice if I kept on producing things that ended up being clutter for other people, aka a burden. But as I'm saying this out loud, I'm also realizing that the real clutter in life definitely comes more from like the plastic tit and tat you get on like drop shipping websites and Amazon, and things that get lost in houses and you just kind of move around, and like a handmade hat isn't going to be as useless as that kind of crap, I think. I don't really know. And there's no answer, and there's no superiority or a judgment on what people choose to do with their lives. Like, at the end of the day, we're just people, we're just trying to get by, do what makes us happy in a world that sometimes can be really stressful in so many different ways. Like, sometimes I'm very stressed out and I want to buy myself a nice thing, or I want to cast on a new project, and it's just like, why not, right? Like, we're here to have a good time. It's okay to break the rules. And actually that brings me to the next question, I guess, which was my philosophy on buying yarn and if I would ever do a no-buy. And I feel like I have so many thoughts on the topic, and I will not be eloquent about it, and it will not be a structured, nice video where I know what I'm about to say, so bear with me while I work through these things as I speak, because this is the format of this video, is kind of just like relaxed and authentic. So I was tempted to do a no-buy. Basically, I had this idea that for the 12-hour charity live stream, if we reached a crazy goal, like £10,000 donated to charity, fundraised from you guys, then maybe I would do a no-buy for a whole year, because I know from my stats that my stash could sustain me for one entire year. I wouldn't feel like I wouldn't be unable to knit. I would have things for the different seasons, I'd have different colors and different yarn weights, like fingering, DK, blah blah blah. So yeah, I would be able to not buy for a year and still be able to partake in my hobby, which is, at the end of the day, what I want to do is knit, right? It's not, I want to buy yarn. I'm also super aware of the dangers of restrictive behavior. For a lot of people, it can be very triggering, and for a lot of people, it has the complete opposite effect. And it's made me sad. I've seen some people talk about how they have this whole no-buy rule, then they break it for a reason or another, and they feel such guilt associated with that purchase now. And it's like, why even buy it then if you're gonna feel such negative emotions around it? It's like setting yourself up for disappointment and failure and not self-hatred, but disappointment. So I think a no-buy year would be dangerous, because putting yourself on such a strict restriction could lead to you having a lot of negative feelings. And why would you put yourself through that for the potential payoff of a really good feeling at the end of the year? If you do meet your goal, will you feel really, really good about it and feel like it was a huge achievement? And also, obviously, like, save a lot of money. But I think the same could be achieved with something less restrictive than a no-buy rule, and instead a low-buy. Or what I know some people are doing is some kind of like, well, I'm trying to do net negative, so I'm trying to end the year with less yarn than I started with, and I'm doing that through knitting it and destashing it, and then buying less, which I've been doing so far the last 2 months. So January and February, I've used more yarn than I've bought, so I'm on track for that, and we're already a sixth of the way into the year. That's terrifying. So far it is quite, like, it's working for me, that system. I think it's a nice transition into being more mindful of my yarn consumption and purchasing habits, as opposed to starting off with such a cold turkey method. And I guess I'm speaking just from personal experience, because for a lot of people cold turkey might be the way to go, but I know that I would be quite sensitive to, like, I don't know how I'm going to be in 11 months. And if in 11 months I just, like, had to buy some yarn for a reason or another, and then I failed my 12-month no-buy goal, and then I bought yarn, I'd feel so bad about it. Like, and it's just yarn at the end of the day. It's just knitting, and none of this is a big deal as long as you're not putting yourself in considerable debt or hiding purchases from other people and sacrificing other things in favor of yarn. Like, that's kind of the bare minimum of, you're not hurting anyone if you're just buying yarn. I think there's another topic as well that I have feelings about, in terms of, are we promoting overconsumption? Like, we're not hurting anyone. Like, if I'm buying yarn and I'm showing it on screen and I'm saying, I bought this, I'm not even saying you should too, I'm just saying that I bought it. Is that promoting purchases of yarn in general? Is that going to make any one of you go and buy that exact same yarn because it looked really good on my screen? do I want to create this like chain of events where now somebody out there here is overwhelmed with their stash because of the constant reminder on podcasts and YouTube and Instagram that there's always a new yarn, always a new color, always a new hand-dyed collection. But also you have to put the responsibility back in the consumer, where just because something is shown on screen doesn't mean that you should fall directly into the clutch of capitalism and go straight into buying it because other people are doing it. Like, people need to keep their common sense and make their own decisions, but it would be misguided to think that we're not indirectly influenced by so much around us. And that's why I really, really try and keep my podcast a non-commercial space. And I know I'm not 100% successful at that. I know that I've done a couple of collaborations for the knitting live stream. I had a lot of sponsors that I then hyped up and talked about and promoted. And then I also have my acquisition sections. So if I really wanted to do what I preach, I would never show acquisitions, and I would also just never do collaborations with brands. And then that way I would keep my space here on YouTube as ad-free and purchasing-free. Like, just my space would be this little oasis of respite from the constant tornado and overwhelming display of just capitalism. And I really, that's what I would want that. At first I was, because I didn't have many subscribers, I didn't have anyone to like partnership with. I did still have acquisition sections, but I still did that. But I did it because everybody was doing it. Like, I just thought it was a part of the podcast. But here it's like, why am I even showing you yarns in my podcast if I'm not even knitting with it? Like, I will eventually, but our acquisition sections on podcasts, should we keep that, or should we just move to a whole new thing? I think what I prefer doing is showing my future swatches and future plans, or, you know, like what's next in my queue and what am I looking forward to. I think saying this is making me realize that maybe I do want to switch things up a little bit, maybe skip the acquisitions, because I don't always show what I'm buying. Sometimes I show you the highlights, sometimes I don't buy anything between podcast episodes. But there's really no rule. There's no yarn police that's going to come in my room and say, oh my god, you bought something and you didn't show it on the podcast. You have to come with us. Like, yeah, I think it's the least interesting part of a knitting podcast is seeing what other people have. I personally would never watch those videos of people unboxing things. I really don't see the point of them, and I don't enjoy them. If you do, that's perfectly fine. And if you make those videos, that's also perfectly fine. So why am I showing you yarn that I have? That's also why I'm never going to do a video that's like showing you my stash. It just feels very useless and kind of like show-offy. I don't know. Some people have done it really well, and like the tone of the video is really nice, especially if you're like talking about the plans that you have for it. It just feels like it would be really repetitive, where it's like, I had money, you can exchange money for goods and services. I purchased goods. The goods are now in my possession. The end. But nobody wants to see that. So, yeah, I think I'm gonna try and do what I preach a bit more, and I'm gonna try and be more focused on not overwhelming you guys with advertisements. Because I feel passionate about that. I want there to be safe places in the world where you're not being told to buy stuff. Because it's really getting to me how if you're anywhere online, it will find you, the ads will find you, they will disguise themselves, and it's just a voice that you kind of want to just shut off, like just quiet down for a minute. And a podcast, which is like an hour, like I watch a podcast for an hour, and usually, more often than not, there will be a little just mentions of businesses in any way, shape or form. And of course you can't pretend that businesses don't exist, and small businesses are better to support than huge corporations. But still, I have to spend my money every day? Or like, like the joke of when you're an adult and there's just days where for no reason at all you're just gonna have to spend £60. Like you go off and you go buy a scone at the thing, you go and do a little grocery shop, get some cheese, and then you have to buy a new pillow or something, and it's like boom, like you've spent 50 quid. Ugh, like what a sinkhole. Like money is hard to earn and then you spend it so quickly. And it would be nice if I wasn't tempted, or if people didn't remind me that there's this new thing you can buy, there's this new thing you can buy, or have you tried this shop yet? Ooh, this shop owner is really nice, you should give them your money. It's like, no, maybe I just want to keep my money for myself. And I know that this is directly at odds with what I was talking about like a half hour ago, where I was like, you can treat yourself, life is too short. But I don't know, I feel like spending money can become such a... especially with like, like digital, like online purchases and everything, like it doesn't feel like anything anymore to spend money, because it doesn't feel real, it's not physical, you don't even have to leave your couch. So, I don't know. I feel like I'm very much like old man yells at cloud right now, and I don't know if this is resonating with people, so as always, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on yarn consumption and just capitalism in general, and ads on podcasts and like paid partnerships or unpaid. Like I'm also speaking about like the unpaid sponsorships that people do, like I was gifted this yarn or I was gifted this bag, so let me talk about this product for 5 minutes. How do we feel about these? And again, I hope that this is a safe place where you can put what you really believe and truly feel in the comments while being constructive and respectful to each other's opinions, because there's no right or wrong opinion and people can do what they want as long as they're not physically or actively harming other people. But yeah, so yeah. I think that's it for that topic. And then another topic that we could end on afterwards was just tips for knitting color work. I probably will talk about this maybe in the podcast at a different time, like maybe in a one-off video or in another episode where I do more color work. But I think what really matters is the yarn that you choose. You gotta pick a sticky yarn, maybe one that plumps up a lot with blocking, or a round yarn that fills in the gaps. So I really like the Jamison Spindrift Shetland for those reasons, and they have a really nice color selection that they go really well together, so it's really pleasing to the eye. Pick enough contrast depending on what type of pattern you're doing. Make sure that your tension is good. I'm still trying to figure that one out. I think what I'm going to do next time is experiment with going down a needle size in color work, because I have really loose color work, so it's always completely out of proportion, and the gauge changes quite significantly. So the tension is really important for color work. But I would really say like experiment with different yarns and different needle sizes as well. Like you might not think your color work looks really good on a sweater or on a sock, but if you try a hat, because of like the circular needles and this like smaller type circumference, like it might just be neater that way. And then practice, obviously it will not get better unless you get some projects under your belt. But I really think that yarn for color work is, maybe just in my experience, I would say for me, is 50% of the story, is whether I pick the right yarn for it, and if the yarn is doing the work for me, then I did good. Okay, so I think that's all I had to say, and my voice is getting a bit croaky. And yeah, I think it was nice to kind of get those thoughts out again, because I've been thinking a lot about that kind of like influencing others and the purchases and things like that. Like it's been on my mind a lot for the past few weeks or month. And then it was nice to kind of reflect as well on the joys of knitting, what it brings me, as well as obviously like the things to keep in mind to avoid getting overwhelmed. So yeah, I'd really, again, as always, love to hear your opinions on anything that I've mentioned. Usually those knit and chats get they get less views than other videos, but they get more comments and longer comments, and I try to respond to all of them, but sometimes I fall behind, and I do read all of them, I promise you, so don't let that deter you from leaving your opinion or something. Like, I will read it, and others will too if they read the comments, but I really hope that we can have this conversation and maybe a bit of back and forth. I will try to get to you, I promise, because I really like reading them, and I think it's really nice to have a place to have those conversations, because it's not always something that's easy to just casually chit chat about on Instagram or at knit night, or yeah, it feels like a bit of a deeper topic, and that seems to have become a little bit the theme of my knit and chats, is we can't help but talk about serious stuff, which I promise I don't sit down with the intention to like come and do lectures, but it turns out that if you ask me to speak uninterrupted for an hour, I'll end up talking about something serious. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you found it relaxing or entertaining or informative or thought-provoking. That's also something that could be good if you were in the mood for that. If you weren't, I'm sorry. I've done some progress on my Oslo hat. I feel like I was watching my knitting the entire time, so if you wanted me to give you eye contact, again, I'm really sorry if I couldn't. But made no mistake and got some nice centimeters of the way down done. I don't know if you're going to be able to see the kind of fabric or whether it's showing nicely on screen, but yeah, I'm happy I had this stockinette project, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to film this knit and chat. Okay, I'm just being rambly now. Thank you for watching. Tune in next time for a regular podcast episode. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Okay, happy knitting. Bye!